Now, almost after 4 years, he jumped bail. Leader of the proscribed pro-secession group, Indigenous People of Biafra in Nigeria, Nnamdi Kanu, has been arrested by Interpol and handed over to Nigerian authorities on Sunday. Now, the news of his arrest came in on Tuesday, with reactions trailing his immediate detention. Arraigned in court less than 48 hours after his arrest, and with several issues surrounding his personality, his group and what it stands for, Kanu is arguably the biggest news in Nigeria today, and he's the focus of our discourse on our first half here on VSA. Welcome, I'm Sulaiman. Well, on the 14th of October 2015, Nnamdi Kanu was first arrested in Lagos, southwest of Nigeria, on charges of treasonable felony and terrorism. It was a year after he had founded the Indigenous People of Biafra to agitate for the secession of a Biafra Republic. Kanu, who also heads Biafra Radio, was detained for more than a year with the Nigerian government snubbing various court orders ordering his release. Now, he was accused of criminal conspiracy, treason, intimidation, and membership of an illegal organization. In April of 2017, he was granted bail and was released by the Department of State Security in Nigeria. In 2017, specifically September, Kanu's home in Abia State in southeast of Nigeria was raided in what led to the death of some of his members. Kanu, who claimed he escaped the incident on the day, was nowhere to be found for the next 1 year until he was seen in videos and photos believed to be taken in Israel. Kanu has often cut a very controversial figure, asking members of his group to take up arms at different times, which led to IPOB being proscribed. Now, he soon got back to the thick of things, dictated proceedings in absentia, and established the Eastern Security Network, which have in the past few months been on a fighting spree with Nigeria's military. While many do not agree that Nigeria is doing well as a country, Kanu's approach to activism has also left many criticizing his moves, while others have staunchly supported him. He faces trial for accusations of terrorism, treasonable felony, and other charges on July 26. Now, joining me now to unpack this is a lawyer and member of the Lincolns in London, Daniel Boiler. Good to have you, Daniel, and thanks for finding time to join us here on The Square. Now, let's, quickly, a lot of people have been saying, commenting on the rearrest, because that's what it is, the rearrest of Nnamdi Kanu. What does Kanu's arrest mean, especially to the Nigerian government?
Well, thank you, Suleiman, for having me, and your viewers, good evening. No doubt the rearrest, but the government would like to call it interception, because it is believed that he was moving from point A to B when the government intercepted him. It is a product of intelligence and collaboration between the Nigerian government, the country where he was arrested, and the international police. But you asked the question, what is the implication of his arrest to the Nigerian government? The answer is quite enormous. If you have looked at or observed the trajectory since sometime mid last year, Kanu became emboldened and was able to establish the Eastern Security Network. And then the funding, the government could not trace the funding. But that the movement continued to grow, and became more violent. And then they begin to establish themselves as non-status in federating units where the governors, if you ask me, I would say, felt intimidated, that they either had to play ball in the sense that they had to show sympathy to his movement, or they had to stay absolutely quiet. That is the situation Kanu has brought the entire Southeast to the point where even governors who wanted to come and speak out against him, you will never hear them in the open speaking out against him, because if you do, then they will make your state ungovernable. Example, you see the case of Imo State, practically shut down. And then when this idea that Abia State governor might likely defect to APC, you see the threat there. But that is if you're looking at it from the perspective of the federating unit or the region from where Nnamdi Kanu came from. But in a whole, you notice that the insecurity in the southeast that is propelled by Nnamdi Kanu's movement begins to have this spiral effect in other parts of the country. For example, Igbo is believed to be inspired by what Nnamdi Kanu was doing, and he was able to begin his own movement. But you can see after the arrest of Nnamdi Kanu, today Igbo said he has cancelled his Lagos movement, the rally that he wanted to have. And he emphatically said that he cannot fight the government. So the implication of his arrest, if I have to borrow the exact word used by Ohaneze Ndibo worldwide, they said his arrest has actually stopped a civil war in Nigeria. That is exactly, there is no better way to describe his arrest. It is the government breakthrough by stopping what is definitely would have happened as a civil war in the country.
Daniel, now you use the word the government breakthrough. We'll come back to some of those comments or actions by Nigeria's president lately, Muhammadu Buhari. But again, on the legal front, were you surprised with the pace of his rearraignment, considering the slow nature of the Nigerian judicial system?
Right. The provision of the law is that somebody is presumed innocent until he's proved guilty. And the instrument for proving that he's guilty is in the court of law through the judicial process. So you first of all, you arrest, you draft charges, you arraign the person before the court, he takes his plea, and then a day is given for trial. If he's in custody, he applies for bail. And that was exactly what happened the first time he was arrested. He was granted bail consequently. And then after a while, he moved to the southeast. And then when the military went on a raid, he now found a way and escaped. Now that he's back, it is not as though they are going to draft new charges, except if facts that have now emerged warrant the drafting of a new charge to add to the existing, because the trial that commenced for which he escaped has not died. So they arraigned him before the same judge and then had the plea read to him. He pleaded not guilty, and then an application was made to the court having regard to this fact that he has now jogged bail, so he's a flight risk. The government now decided he should be confined in the custody of DSS. And then the date, I think that the case is adjourned to must be 23 or so, sometime in July, 23 or 25.
26, July 26.
26, good, July 26 for the hearing. Now, on the same date, if he has application for bail, he will bring, but he's not likely to get bail anywhere in Nigeria, because bail is a discretion of the court by law, but that discretion must be exercised judiciously and judicially. Now, instances where bail are refused are if, for example, somebody is charged on a capital offense and the prosecution is able to advance an objection to the application for bail that if this person is released, is going to interfere with investigation, or he's going to escape and will not be able to attend to this trial. This is self-evident that if a bail is granted to him, big bail is granted to him, he's most likely going to escape. So he is likely not to have bail application granted. So that means for the remainder of his days in this criminal trial, he's going to be coming from the custody, whether it is DSS custody or in the prison, he's going to be under the custody of the federal government for the trial.
Okay, quickly here, I'm quite sure you've been following, comments from his attorneys. They've all called for the right to a fair hearing, which you also highlighted earlier on. Judging by the accusations leveled against him, do you think this is a tough legal battle for the Nigerian state?
I think it is pretty much straight. Straight in the sense that once you draft charge and you bring to the court against someone, first of all, the principle of drafting charges is that nobody can be convicted or prosecuted for an offense that is not defined by law and prescribed in a written legislation. So when somebody is charged, you say that A, B, and C on or about so and so within so jurisdiction has committed this, thereby contravened this, and has committed an offense pursuant to this, punishable by this. Now that has been strengthened. In terms of fair trial that they are talking about, fair trial is one, the opportunity that the court gives to both parties to be heard. That is called fair trial. The prosecution will advance his case, the accused will advance his defense. so, for example, will be influenced negatively, is where the right of the accused person is being denied, or if he has cogent and compelling reason to say that the judge before whom he is brought is biased. So if, for example, politically you have said something as a judge against him, you have expressed sentiment against him, and then a matter comes before you, he will say that, having regard to the circumstance, I do not think that I will get a fair trial before this judge. Now, unless they give a better particular to support their claim that he is not likely to have a fair trial by law is the opportunity given by court for both parties to ventilate their case. And I think that within the framework of what is happening, he's definitely going to get fair trial, because there must be a case before the court. Prosecution will open his case, bring his witnesses. He will lead them in evidence. The defense will be given the opportunity to cross-examine each of the witnesses. When he finishes, then if the defense wants to bring an application for a no-case submission, he can so do. And if he wants to go ahead to put up a defense, then he will then begin to bring his own witnesses to testify in his defense. And the prosecution will get the opportunity to cross-examine.
Let me comment here quickly, especially for the benefit of other Africans watching who are not too familiar with the happenings in Nigeria. You made mention of Igbo, someone in southwest of Nigeria who's also, before now, audacious in his agitations. Tell us if this, honestly, because some are asking if the government would extend the same, arm of law as we have seen with Nnamdi Kanu to others who have been, agitating or seem to be, for want of a better word, troublemakers to the Nigerian state. Right.
So the right to agitate is constitutionally guaranteed. You have the right to say, I am not treated fairly in this country, or my people are not treated fairly. You even have the right to say that based upon A, B, and C, we want to secede from Nigeria. That is freedom of expression. Where your rights of expression has a limit is as long as you do that within the confines of the law. You have not broken the law, you have not committed an offense, you are not generating violence. Now, the difference between Igbo and Nnamdi Kanu is that Igbo is at the primary or preliminary stage of first expressing dissatisfaction and saying that, having regard to the increasing insecurity in the country, we want to create our country. Saying that in itself is not a crime in law. But by the time you begin to make good what you say by vandalizing, causing destruction, destroying the machinery of the state, taking steps that the law forbids, then it is at that stage that what you have been canvassing can be treated as treasonable felony or any other offense that is defined by law. Now, in the case of Nnamdi Kanu, why they are not the same, when you talk about whether the same can be applied to them, is that Nnamdi Kanu, at the beginning, he started by just castigating, expressing his displeasure, using incendiary words and terms. But then he upgraded his point of aggression to now ask specifically that members of the ESN should go and burn down police station, should kill law enforcement, should kill private citizens. And these things he has been saying are factually established, that as soon as he says some things like that, you see that correlationship between his words and the crime. The next thing is exactly as he predicts, they will go and commit. When they go and commit that, you will see him back again in the next broadcast. He will confirm every of the crime that has been committed consequent on his order. So that is what qualifies his own as a fresh criminal action. And I believe that beside the crime that he has been charged with before, based on this recent event, there is likely going to be additional charges.
Actually, that's where I was coming to, Daniel, because when you use the word factually established, and if truly these are factually established, it then means that Nnamdi Kanu may be having fresh charges, brought against him.
Exactly. So there are two options open to the prosecution. Number one, go ahead with trial in this court, but then file another fresh charge before another court. But there has been decisions of court that says you cannot prosecute concurrently. So they can decide to, if they want, leave those charges in abeyance, because in criminal law, offense do not have statutes of limitation. Anybody who commits a crime, any day you can, prosecute them. So they can, if they wish, they can continue with the existing charge, and after which they will then bring this one. But I think the steps they're taking is that they have actually filed fresh charges, which now includes the new offenses and the previous one altogether. And that is why the charge was read to him fresh and he pleaded not guilty, in my opinion. So this is what differentiates the actions of Nnamdi Kanu and that of Igboho. Igboho is agitating but has not taken the steps to begin to commit crimes that are established by law in Nigeria. Now, if he has been doing that, security agencies, because you see, in criminal law, there is what we call mens rea and actus reus. Mens rea is the mental element. Sometimes the mental element of crime is what we don't see. That's when people plan, they call it, begin to create. Actus reus is when the act is finally concluded. So the security agencies may have information about his mens rea, but in terms of the actus reus, it is what we must be seen. If, for example, they start burning police stations, they start killing people on that account, then you'll be able to say he can be charged for so and so offense as it stands. And definitely, if he continues in this trajectory, he will have to get to the point, because there will come a point where the government may have placed some limitation in the protests. Remember that the constitution that guarantees the right of movement, right of expression, also states that nothing will preclude any law that is reasonably made in a democratic society, meaning that your rights are qualified. Government can come up with a new law saying, having regard to the insecurity in Nigeria, this and this and this cannot take place within this period. And so if you break or breach that, then it becomes a ground for you to be charged or prosecuted.
Now, quickly here, let's start talking about some of the key things raised, especially by the social cultural group from Nigeria's southeast region, Ohaneze Ndigbo. They say this has actually stopped an impending civil war. How can the government of Nigeria ensure that there is some kind of conversation opened? If you say, well, it is within the right of individuals in a state to also, agitate and also, talk about their grievance within the confines of the law. Do you see the government of Nigeria opening a conversation, like a dialogue between the group or any other group in that region to look at some of those key demands?
So this is the strategy of engagement. If you want to sit on the table, I recall while I was in London some 2 weeks ago, I granted an interview on a program they call a Lombard TV, where that question was raised that if Nnamdi Kanu can tone down this rhetoric and this thing, can the government have a sit down? I remember I made a commitment that I said, if they can take those steps, I personally will convey the message to the instrument of the state and see if there was going to be a sit down. And I gave them my guarantee that there's definitely going to be, because there is no government that will not want solution to a problem. But since the last conversation to today, heinous crimes have been committed. And the two things that you have to observe in engagement is that you cannot in one breath be asking for a sit down, and in another breath, you continue with violence. And now that he has been charged to court, he did not on his own, said, okay, if the government will call me for a sit down, I'll be more than willing to talk. Now that he had to be arrested or intercepted, whatever is the nomenclature, to be brought back, it is very unlikely that the government will be prosecuting you and be sitting with you. Because the minute the government starts sitting with you to negotiate while you are under prosecution before the court, it is inadvertently, it is an admission by the government that the movement or the cause you are fighting is justified by law. This is where the problem is. But now, in terms of engaging with a region about the truth or otherwise of a claim, Nnamdi Kanu is not an elected officer in the Southeast. And the country, every country works on the basis of coordination and organization. He is not a state governor, he is not a senator, he is not a recognized leader. In fact, quite a number of groups in the Southeast disown him. And I told you that the only reason why lately they've been quiet is because they felt that he has emboldened himself in violence, that anybody's life can be put at risk. That's why they kept quiet. But you see, shortly after his arrest, they have started speaking one by one. So it will be difficult. Who do you negotiate with? With Nnamdi Kanu? Certainly no. But the government in the Southeast or individuals in the Southeast can themselves form a group. And I think they did that sometimes, but where they paid a visit to the president and genuinely raised those things that they believe were things agitating the minds of their people. and the government had an engagement with them. That is one. In the area of Igbo, since he has not taken it to the level of crime and violence, it is the best opportunity that he can have to engage with the government. And there are various ways of engagement. To me, if they want to engage with the government in such a manner that the government's conduct or action with them will not then belittle or underrate the established authority in their region. I will give you an instance of what I'm saying. If federal government call Igbo or Nnamdi or anybody to begin to negotiate, the legal question is on what basis? Because the community he claims to be representing while he is fighting, that community has a constituted authority. There is a governor there. There are cabinet members in the state. There are lawmakers in the state. There are judiciary branch in the state. And so when you ignore them and begin to negotiate with these, while you are looking for peace, you will create a bigger problem, because then you are delegitimizing the established authority in those areas.
Let me see if we can close on this. Sorry, we're almost out of time. Apologies, Daniel Bwala. Let's quickly close on this. It would seem as if we're talking about the man, President Muhammadu Buhari. He tried this once in 1983 as military head of state, trying to put a former politician in a crate in London, bringing him back. That was a failed attempt. And some think that, well, he seemed to have learned a lesson in that failed attempt. Now, for the second time, he seemed to have made some gains in bringing someone or intercepting someone that is badly needed home in Nigeria. Can you put this side by side with some of the key comments that the president has been making lately?
You know, after everybody bashed him as showing a sign of weakness, and you remember the last interview when he said that the criminal element of the country will not allow the peace of the state, he will show them the language they will understand. It appears this is the language they are all understanding, because one, Nnamdi Kanu has been brought back. Igbo is cancelling his rally, and I'm sure you have seen or must have been reading lately the kind of success that the army were having in the Northeast. As soon as these people are about to break, they will just get a very big blow on them. And the bandits are the next. You have heard what the government's position is regarding the bandit. Now, this is what every president needs to do, because more than what we are seeing, your primary responsibility is the security of lives and the welfare of the people. As regarding the 1983 and what he did lately, that is every national intelligence agency of any country. In the case of America, it's CIA. In the case of Britain, it's MI6. That is what they do. They are built by law to operate outside of the country, and it is for operations like that. And Nigeria was tactical about it. They knew he was living in England, but having a British passport will make it difficult for them to get him, except you follow the extradition route, which will take a long time. And British have maintained the position that what he was doing was agitation and not insurrection. So the government calculated and arranged how to get him in a jurisdiction where they have a smoother relationship, and they arranged for his arrest. This is what every intelligence agency of a country does, that to Nigerian citizens who are fugitives outside of the country.
Well, it's a fine place for us to say many thanks for being such a nice company. Always a delight having you on the square, Daniel Bwala, legal practitioner
always
from,
my pleasure.
From Nigeria.
Always my pleasure. Always
well,
my
still
pleasure.
to come on the square, we have Dr. Tunji Ogunyemi and Taiwo Akerele as we draw the curtains on Africa debt crisis. That'll be when we return. Well, African countries are advised to borrow right for greater future human and capital development. While the countries on the continent need new ideas, new projections and new systems of earning better revenues. And without these ideas and systems getting fortified, there is a problem of sustenance and spending wisely. While many problems have been laid bare, what's next is seeking solutions to these problems of debt dependency on the continent. Well, I could have Dr. Tunji Ogunyemi, Senior Lecturer, Economic History of Bafemi Awolowo University, back again, and of course Taiwo Akerele of Borrow Right Africa Program in New York, United States. Very quickly here, let me start with you, Taiwo. Good to see you again. And we're closing on this conversation. We've had actually quite a number of Africans weighing in on this. It's been an interesting one, going over to Zambia yesterday. But quickly here, how did African countries, move away from the Paris Club? And what does it mean to these countries?
Well, thank you, Suleiman. In Borrow Right Africa, we have identified a major challenge, which is Africa's share of world trade, standing at 3% for a continent with 1.3 billion population is abysmally low. It shows and it appears that we are one of the most unproductive continents on planet Earth. Africa's estimated 400 billion debt portfolio as a proportion of our GDP and export earning is also the highest in the world. But it was never like this, Suleiman. I'm happy that Dr. William is here with us. When you look at Africa's past, Africa was never a beggarly continent. Africa was one of the most productive continents 400, 500 years ago. And the records are there. Are you going to talk about the Songhai Empire, where people like Mansa Musa reign supreme? You talk of Kanem Bornu, you talk of the Benin Empire, then not to talk of Egypt. Then you talk of, the Queen Sheba that went to see Solomon all the way from Ethiopia, gave Solomon 120 tons of gold. So Africa was never a beggarly continent. And therefore we need to look back and identify the gap, and position ourselves to become a productive economy, a productive continent that adds value to the world economy.
Let me bring in Dr. Ogunyemi. Dr. Ogunyemi, good to see you again on the square. Taiwo has just gone down history lane, and many Africans will be so pained listening to Taiwo now, who's just mentioned some of the key, gains of Africa, many years ago. The Songhai Empire, the Benin Empire, Egypt, Mali, and some other empires he's mentioned, and how some of the kings then were taking some of Africa's resources as gifts to helping people even in Europe. There have been instances when the Paris Club wrote off many countries' debts. Is it possible to have creditors writing off these new debts? By the way, I first of all want you to react to some of those things raised by Taiwo before you come back to the issue of Paris Club, Dr. Ogunyemi.
Yes, I agree absolutely with Taiwo. Africa has not been this beggarly. Our history has been the history of self-sufficiency, particularly self-sufficiency in those things that we consume. We consumed those things that we produced, and we produced those things that we consumed. We were not beggarly, especially from the time of Tekra, 600 AD, up to the time of Muhammad Ali, the Pasha and modernizer of Egypt in the 18th century. So it has never been a system in which Africa borrowed significantly in such a way that she went into a debt burden. But we have colonialism which gradually but successfully either downgraded Africa's productive energies by introducing foreign products, foreign goods, and foreign kind of things that we had to satisfy, a tax economy rather than a tribute economy, that we had to work for European currencies to be able to pay our taxes, and an externally directed productive system such that we were producing what we never needed and were importing what we needed. For example, we started producing cocoa and coffee when very few African children ever ate chocolates. How many African children eat chocolate? Even now, chocolate is the product where the urban settlers, the children of the creme de la creme, eat. It's not essentially an African food. But we were producing them and committing 80% of our agricultural production to those things that our children and our people never ate. And so so our economy became externally directed. So we were pauperized as a result of our productive energies being directed at those things that we never needed. And then we imported what we needed. So it means that whatever we labored for in terms of export, we used in importing. So when there was a disarticulation or insufficiency in what we work for export and what we needed for import, then the issue of insufficiency, insolvency, and borrowing arose. So I agree totally with Taiwo for the histrionics of indebtedness.
Again, I actually wanted you to also quickly weigh in on the issue of Paris Club, Dr. Ogunyemi. Talking about the Paris Club, many wondered how, a lot of African countries have moved away from, the Paris Club. Earlier on the program, you had made mention of the, Islamic loans, and also you tied that with the Chinese loans. And yesterday, our experts from Zambia also, spoke eloquently about the risk going for the Chinese loans. So tell us now that Africa is away from the Paris Club and looking at more of the Chinese loans, what can Africa be doing at the moment to actually, let's borrow the word from Taiwo, how can they borrow right at the moment?
Yes, Nigeria significantly in 2006 exited its Paris Club debt indebtedness when it paid $12 billion American dollars, and the sum of $18 billion American dollars was written off as a result of that very unusual debt agreement or debt cancellation with that unforgiving club of creditors. But they forgave Nigeria. Now, the same does not apply to many countries in Africa south of the Sahara, 35 of them that are classified under the heavily indebted poor countries, HIPs. And we still have some of them owing the Paris Club significantly. Although I must say that the Chinese are now gradually replacing them, gradually but surely replacing them. So I think it is a shift away from Euro-denominated debt or Europe-sourced loans to Asia and China-sourced loans. So that movement may be a movement in what I call realpolitik, because, the Chinese are gradually overtaking the US, if they have not even overtaken them in terms of productive energy and exportation to the world economy. So we have a situation in which the Chinese, in the next 10 years, will be the numero uno of world trade and world international finance capital. That is going to be what will happen. And so it is not out of place for Africa to want to migrate significantly away from Europe-denominated loans to Southeast Asia, or rather Chinese-denominated loans. So it makes sense. The only thing is that we need to be very careful. And Taiwo was right when he said we needed to borrow right. Borrowing right does not mean you shouldn't borrow. And it does not mean you must not borrow in such a way as to cover your infrastructure. It actually means that you borrow at terms, those conditionalities that are not injurious to your economy. That's what it means. And I'm afraid, I don't think many African countries are doing that now. I'm afraid.
Well, I think it doesn't really look good, if anyone would, go with that fear being nursed by Dr. Ogunyemi. Let me bring in Taiwo. Taiwo, your group is a key player in Africa's economy, looking at, developments in many African countries. What's the future of Africa's revenue generation at the moment?
Thank you, Suleiman, once again. See, we've been having a lot of discussions with Africa's development partners. And our development partners are, in terms of lending and support for institutional, restructuring, they are known. We have the World Bank, we have the African Development Bank, we have the IMF, and recently the Chinese. And, the Chinese government doesn't deal with Africa directly. They deal with Africa through their lending institutions like the Chinese Exim Bank and other institutions. So we've been sitting with them and agreeing on issues around how to restructure Africa's debt, how to restructure Africa's approach towards assessing development financing that will not choke generations yet unborn. But again, there are responsibilities that are clearly, bestowed on African government. And we've been supporting African government to come up with a portfolio of solutions. And this portfolio of solutions, which also, some other people refer to as basket of solutions revolve around governance. There are governance issues, there are economic issues, there are value creation issues, and of course, we also look at the trade terms. And when we talk of governance issues, we've agreed that Africa cannot continue the way we are in terms of governance, the way our public institutions are structured. It is structured in such a way that it's not productive. It's more of consumption-based institutions in Africa more than that of production. Then, of course, we talk of reducing the cost of governance. When you pick up a loan from a development partner that you're supposed to spend, on infrastructure, you are now using it for salary and for immunization and for key things that you can actually fund yourself, then you have actually lost focus. And that accounts for why it's always difficult for countries when their debt is matured for payback, they start asking for debt cancellation rather than debt reduction. So for us in Borrow Right Africa, we have said that enough of African countries asking for debt cancellation. We are ripe as a continent to actually borrow and pay when it is time for us to pay. Then we're also looking at the budgeting architecture for African states. The budgeting architecture, it does not support production. It's only support running of government. It does not support, support for private sector. Most of the countries doing well in the world, like South Korea, China, Singapore, they have private sector-led economy. The government only regulate. So when the government takes center stage in economic development, right, rather than regulation of key policies, there's no way they will not have debt crisis. Then we also notice that African leaders, when they are approaching development partners for partnership, they approach them on a beggarly note. Enough of African leaders, meeting with World Bank and IMF on a beggarly note. We're a huge continent, for God's sake, of over 1.3 billion people. We should go to these guys on an equal basis with your work plan, with your budget. This is what I want to achieve in the next 5 years. I have 30 billion, but I actually need 100 billion. Where do I get the financing gap from? 70 billion is what I need, and this is how I'm going to pay. I talked of Morocco repaying back his loan. A loan they collected in March last year. That loan was not due for repayment until 3 years' time. But by September of 2020, they had indicated interest to pay back. That is a responsible African country that every country should take a clue from. So we should not go to these guys with a notion of with a beggarly approach. We should go to them on an equal basis, on a serious responsibility note. Then in terms of economic management, our economic management system appears not to be too radical and progressive. There are tools that have been deployed over the years to manage the economy. There's a physical policy aspect, and there's the monetary policy aspect. CBNs all over the world, the central banks all over the world actually use monetary policy to control inflation, to control interest rate. While these finance ministries use monetary policy to control, government spending and taxation. How have we deployed these tools in stimulating economic growth in most sub-Saharan African countries? These are issues. Then spending of loan proceeds should be heavy on infrastructure and low on social and consumption. If you spend more on infrastructure, you are likely going to be eligible to pay back when it is time to pay back. But when you spend on consumption, which government ordinarily should invest in through other means, what they call, quantitative easing and all for those of them who are microeconomics. When you pick up a debt from development partners, you should spend more on infrastructure, spend more on agribusiness, spend more on value chain, like what Singapore has done, like what South Korea has done. Spend more on SME, leveraging on your population, building their capacity. These are some of the portfolio of solutions that Borrow Right Africa has come up with. And we should emphasize more on long-term economic planning. What we notice in Africa, Suleiman, is very unfortunate and sad that every government in Africa wants to come up with its own economic development agenda. At the end of 4 years or at the end of 8 years maximum, those economic development agenda are discarded for a completely new policy. a completely new economic plan.
Let me butt in here, Taiwo. Taiwo, apologies. Let me butt in here because some of the things you raised, I remember the last time we had Dr. William Evie, he said almost the same thing, that countries should borrow and, plow that into infrastructural development rather than, some other, expenditures. Quickly here, Dr. William Evie, you've heard Taiwo. Perhaps we should start asking the relationship between, going back in time, if the colonial history of African countries have any relationship with what was seen in the lack of economic sovereignty in many African countries.
Yes, lack of economic sovereignty is a function of several factors. But the most critical of them is when you do not have significant investment species, investment funds, you go a borrowing, and of course you are indentured, you are in state, practically speaking. So those countries whom you are investing, you are borrowing. And if you are borrowing from those countries, they will give you conditions. At times they call them conditionalities. You'll be surprised that one of the very funny conditionalities IMF will often impose is trade liberalization, currency devaluation, and then you reduce your public sector investment in terms of public sector employment. So these conditionalities, of course, necessarily enslave those countries that are borrowing. Of course, we have seen in the first parts of Africa from 1980 to 2000 that the idea of liberalization of trade, devaluation of currency never worked. It failed woefully in Ghana, it failed in Cote d'Ivoire, and it failed absolutely in Senegal. And it did not work at all in Nigeria, to the extent that by 1996, we had completely abandoned the so-called structural adjustment program. Nevertheless, any country would be a slave to that country, practically speaking, which lends its money. So it's very good and it's an advisable thing for a country to seek to have significant economic independence by leveraging, as Taiwo has said, on its human capital. Human capital, which can be improved at all times by quality education. And then you can also leverage on your comparative advantage. If we study our comparative advantage in Nigeria, we see that it's in the area of agriculture, it's in the area of markets, it's in the area of commerce. We can particularly look at agriculture in animal husbandry, for example, in the north, palm oil or oil palm production in the southeast, and of course, cocoa and coffee in the southwest. What are we doing about that? Let's speaking about Nigeria. Ditto for other countries in Africa. In Ghana, they can also look at their comparative advantage in cocoa production. In Cote d'Ivoire, they can look at their comparative advantage in cocoa production too, and so on and so forth. Now, the value chain will be added. Look, the economics of scale in terms of the investment in all those areas in which you have comparative advantage can be enormous. And it's high time that African countries started doing that. Do that which you want or you have a comparative advantage to do at the minimum. And then you will see that the advantage will flow to you and you can then begin to get your economic independence.
Well, I think that we're coming home gradually, closing in on some of these key things that African countries must do and should do as a matter of urgency. Taiwo, I want to ask, when is it right to reject a loan offering from a creditor, especially as many seek concessional debts?
Concessionary debts are even, they are acceptable as far as you utilize them effectively. The challenge here is there's no time a country will reject a loan, because actually loans are supposed to help with debt, deficit, the budget deficit. I mean to say, the only time you can reject a loan is when you are self-sufficient. But no country in the world. I mean, I reeled out statistics about countries all over the world, America, China, they are almost 100% of their GDP as debt. So there's never a time you can be out of loan. It's about sustainability of those loans and redemption, at the end of the day. So it's about adding value to the loan that you have collected, adding value to it in such a way that it can multiply itself several times. You know, I looked at Vietnam, I looked at Singapore. These are countries that are actually supposed to be on the same ranking with most African countries, particularly sub-Saharan African countries. These are countries that have, you know, they were very heavy on debt. But over time, a country like Vietnam has added so much value to the agricultural value chain. They've now moved out of just production and agriculture to value creation, to the extent that a lot of countries in the world see Vietnam as a low-cost country where they can actually produce. Thereby, that value chain in terms of employment, in terms of export, net export, and an increase in the value of their local currency, have seen, you know, a lot of development happening in Vietnam over time. The same thing, you know, with Singapore. So it's about value creation, it's about adding value to your economy. When you pick up a debt, there must be a commensurate impact. There must be a commensurate result that when in the final analysis, we add value. Let us look at value creation, for instance. We are talking of domestic production of raw materials. We cannot just say we are a rich country. Rich in what? We are rich in forests, we are rich in agriculture, but what have we done? In my research, I understood that King Mansa Musa added value, maximized the production of gold. What are we maximizing as a new continent in the 21st century? Musa added value to gold and salt before taking them abroad. You must add value to whatever resources that you have been blessed with. We must reduce your import of non-essential goods, such as food and furniture items. When you look at CBN, you know, quarterly report on what we import into Nigeria, it is mind-boggling that we import food, we import furniture. These are areas that we have competitive advantage, and they end up adding to our debt portfolio. What have we done with research and development and artificial intelligence? You know, we must have, you know, there must be a deliberate investment in artificial intelligence, deliberate investment in research. Over time, the next thing, I was talking of economic planning. When you are talking of economic planning, you should also look at how does that add to your economic growth. For you to jump out of the poverty trap, you must grow at 7% per annum over a 10-year period. And in fact, China actually grew for 11% for over 15 years. And that is why they are where they are today. The same thing with Singapore. So Africa must add value to areas where they have factor endowment, area where they have competitive advantage. Then I talked of, you know, negotiating trade deals. Our trade deals is not favorable. It is actually against Africa. For a country, a continent to borrow from 1950 and as at 2021, you are still paying. Something must be fundamentally wrong. And this is particularly prevalent in Francophone countries. In Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, Benin, Senegal, all these countries are paying debt that they collected from France 50, 60 years ago. So there are fundamental, you know, debt structuring issues that needs to be addressed. Having said all of this, when you talk of, you know, the Paris Club, you know, the terms of the engagement terms with Paris Club is actually against Africa. And that is why you see most African countries are gradually moving and inching towards China, because China loan seems to be free, quote and unquote, but with much more stringent conditions that in the final analysis, you may lose your sovereignty if you don't pay.
Let me butt in here because we're closing.
Yeah.
Allow me bring in Dr. Oguyemi so that we can close on this. Listening to Taiwo, he said quite you know, a key number of issues. And just recently, in the news today, Nigeria's Minister of Education, Minister of State for Education, has said that the out-of-school children has increased tremendously. And you said that, well, education is another issue that we should look towards. But for instance, the Chinese loan can't actually fix, specifically is geared towards infrastructural development. Dr. Oguyemi, help us here. You're an academic. How can Africa, especially countries like Nigeria and even Cameroon, how can these two countries and some others get facilities, you know, to plow into their education sector for the betterment of the future of these countries?
It's a function of budget and budgeting. It's actually a function of budget and budget. no doubt about it, in a situation in which education accounts for less than 3% of the budget of the state, and has been accounting for that less than 3% for the budget of the state in the last 10 years, then you do not expect that education will go in such a state. So how will African states do better in terms of education? Adjust their budget, spend more on school enrollment, spend more on training of teachers, and spend more on issues that has to do with acquisition of knowledge. See, the quality of the economy a country gets is directly proportional to the quality of manpower that it has from its schools, from its colleges, and from its universities. So education cannot be a cost. Unlike accountants, we do not regard education as a cost. We see it as investment. At the level of economic history, education is an investment. And so if a nation spends nothing less than 25% of its capital expenditure outlay in a year on education over a period of 10 years, you will see that the result will become so outstanding that for the next half a century, the advantages gained from such investment can never be rolled back. That's my take.
Well, I think it's a fine place for us to say many thanks for being such a nice company. Dr. Tunji Oguyemi and Taiwo Akerele, you've been awesome. And I'm hoping that Africa shortly will look into, fixing its education sector because this ultimately will help it get out of its debt crisis and, of course, make it, a better continent for many. And this a fine place for us to say, well, that the future may be projected to a point where this conversation will continue looking at bringing better solutions to these problems, which definitely Africans like Dr. Oguyemi and Akerele can bring about for the continent. I'll see you again tomorrow. I'm Sulaiman. Bye-bye.